Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Tonight we're continuing in the Ezra Apocalypse, starting chapter 16, which is the last chapter. So we have been going through, last week was pretty interesting because, or the last 2 weeks, going through chapter 15. It talked about some of the end time prophecies, which is actually scattered through the book in different places. But then it talked about the formation of the dragon nations. And we saw that even though the dragon nations are specifically Arab in design originally, that for some reason Turkey and Iran joined the mix for the wars. And it's because they're all the same religion, not necessarily the same ethnic group. So 3 separate ethnic groups, 1 religion. But it's interesting that it's prophesied as such in these passages. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're in chapter 16, so the last chapter, continuing this last day's prophecy. So the first section here is about Babylon, Turkey, Egypt, and Syria. There's already been a couple of prophecies about them as a group, and I think each one is probably a different time period, although they have this similar type thing. So this says, and I guess I should, before we start, when the Ottoman Empire formed, Turkey, of course, is heading the Ottoman Empire from Istanbul, but it would include Iraq, Egypt, and Syria. So some of these prophecies may be back at that particular time period, or if somehow they reconstitute the empire. So this says, woe unto you, Babylon, and Asia Minor. Remember, Asia Minor is Turkey. Woe to you, Egypt and Syria. I always thought that's interesting. You're putting Asia Minor, which is Turkey, and Babylon together. And the previous passages talked about how Turkey absolutely loves Babylon, wants to be just like her, which kind of makes you think maybe Babylon is the Roman Empire, or the concept of an empire at least, because Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire per se, wanted to be or take over the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. So lots of ideas there that could be being talked about. So sometimes when we look at Babylon, we're actually talking about the ancient Babylonia. Other times it's the nation or the city. Remember, originally, right after the flood, we had Nimrod, who started the first Babylonian Empire and tried to build the city of Babylon and then the Tower of Babel. So lots of things to think about. It starts out that way. So sometimes we're not necessarily talking about Babylon, Iraq, or the area of Iraq, but this concept of an empire. So woe be to you, Babylon and Asia Minor. Woe to you, Egypt and Syria. Gird yourselves with sackcloth of hair. Bewail our children and be sorry, for your destruction is at hand. And I would mention it's interesting when the Greeks took over the empire. Remember Daniel's prophecy about the different beasts and the different metals representing the empire. One was Persia, and then we had the Greeks take over. And when the Greeks split into 4, the 2 that dealt with Israel were Egypt and Syria. So Egypt and Syria, even though they were opposing pieces, they're actually part of the same empire, or that empire structure. So you've got a north and a south with Egypt and Syria, and you've got kind of an east-west with Babylon and Turkey. Verse 3 says, a sword is sent to you, and who may turn it back? A fire is sent among you, and who may quench it? Of course, the answer is no one. Plagues are sent to you, and who is he who can drive them away? Can any man drive away a hungry lion in the wood? Or can anyone quench a fire in the stubble when it has begun to burn? So this is all basically metaphors of when the Lord begins to do something, it cannot be stopped. Can anyone turn again an arrow that is shot by a strong archer? The mighty Lord sends the plagues, and who can drive them away? A fire will go forth from his wrath, and who is he who can quench it? He will cast lightnings, and who will not fear? He will thunder, and who will not be afraid? The Lord will threaten, and who will not be utterly beaten into the power of his presence? The earth quakes, and it is at its foundations. The sea rises up with the waves from the deep. The waves of it are troubled, and the fishes thereof also before the Lord, and before his glory and the glory of his power. A lot of times we look at these and we think they're just one metaphor after another, and they probably are just metaphors. Who can pick up 1,000-pound weight? So if the Lord drops one on you, you're going to be flattened. But in some of these cases, especially like the sea rises up and the waves of the deep, that makes you think of the other prophecies, like the southern wind and the attack of the waves and some of the other prophecies. And we are talking about Babylon, Syria, Iraq, and those areas in Turkey. His arrows that shoot are sharp, and they do not miss, when they begin to be shot into the ends of the world. So this is a prophecy about end time. Behold, the plagues are sent, and they will not return until I come upon the earth. That's interesting to me, though, because it seems like no matter what kind of technology we have, what kind of medicine we have, or biological weapon type stuff, whatever we're doing or the planet is doing, it doesn't work for this. So again, God's in control. A fire is kindled and will not be put out until it consumes the foundations of the earth. Like as an arrow which is shot by a mighty archer does not return, even so the plagues that will be sent upon the earth will not return again. So once it starts, it starts. And we think of the plagues being poured out in the book of Revelation. And then we have this section here about the beginning of sorrows. Woe is me, who will deliver me in those days? If you're here at that point, you're not going to be. The beginning of sorrows and the great mourning, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the powers will stand in fear. It's the beginning of the evils. Jesus talked about that as the birth pangs or the beginning of sorrows. So really connecting this with Matthew 24. What will I do when these evils come? Behold, a famine and a plague, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment. Now, it's interesting to me, this whole word here for scourges, because we have a couple references in a couple of different scrolls, and then one back in Isaiah about this scourge that comes on the land. And it seems to indicate like a scourge or the Lord's judgment for doing something with the Messiah. It seems to have happened back with Rome and those things back in the 1st century. But it also seems to be reference to the end of times. So when you see things like that, you need to pull them all together. This isn't giving us any new information yet anyway at this point, but scourges for amendment. But for all these things, they will not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. And we see that in Revelation. In Revelation, it talks about the Lord sends judgments, and they know what's going on, but instead of repenting, they simply curse God, whom they know has sent the plagues. Behold, victuals or food will be so cheap upon the earth, they will think of themselves to be in good case. And even when the evils begin to grow upon the earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. For many of them who dwell upon the earth will perish by famine, and the other who will escape by hunger will the sword destroy. So this is interesting. It seems to almost be contradictory, but basically there's plenty of food. There really is plenty of food for everybody. And the reason why someone is in hunger or there's a famine is the same reason they're being destroyed by the sword. There is an evil government, a set of governments or whatever that's creating this problem. And so it's not that something hit and all the crops are destroyed necessarily in this case, but it's being manipulated. The dead will be cast out as dung. There will be no man to comfort them, for the earth will be wasted, and the cities will be cast down. There will be no man left to till the earth and to sow it. Now, at that point, there really won't be any food. The trees will give fruit, but who will gather them? The grapes will ripen, but who will tread them? For all the places will be desolate of men, so that one man will desire to see another and to hear a voice. That's pretty spooky if you think about it. It's almost like those apocalyptic movies. Is there anyone left on the planet? Surely there are somewhere, but where can we find them? And Isaiah talks about that too, the fact that you go through places and you can't find people. For only 10 will be left in a city, 2 in a field, which will hide themselves in the thick groves and in the clefts of the rocks. And in the orchard of the olives, upon every tree, there are only left 3 or 4 olives. As for when a vineyard is gathered, there shall be left some clusters of them that diligently seek, though, through a vineyard. So very few people, very little crops. And in some cases, the crops are growing back, but there's nobody to gather them. Even so, in those days, there will be 3 or 4 left by them who will search their houses with the sword. That kind of reminds me of if you read Eusebius and Josephus about what happened at the temple. The fact that people would go through house to house with swords to see if there's any food. I remember one of the comments in Eusebius was they would go through and they would actually watch the people. And if there's anybody that doesn't seem to be starving to death, then they must have food somewhere. So you'd follow them to their house, bust in, and then torture them. Just where is the piece of food that you have that you've been working on? And lots of stuff like that. Really bad situation to be in. The earth will be laid waste, the fields thereof will grow old, and her ways and all of her paths will grow full of thorns, because no man will travel through there. The virgins will mourn, having no bridegrooms. The women will mourn, having no husbands. And the daughters will mourn, having no helpers. Their bridegrooms will be destroyed in the wars, and their husbands will perish in the famine. Now, this is a kind of a normal thing, especially in a war. The guys go to war, and most of them get slaughtered, and the women don't have any men. But this almost reads like maybe there's something that attacks and kills men, but not women, like a certain kind of virus, maybe a man-made virus. Don't know that that's the case. It's just reading it a little differently than it normally does. So then we'll read this part here. Listen to the word of the Lord. Hear now these things and understand them, you servants of the Lord. Behold the word of the Lord, and receive it. Believe not the gods to whom from whom the Lord spoke. So don't believe in false gods. Behold, the plagues draw nigh and will not slow down. That makes it seem like it when it starts, it comes in cycles. So if we had a plague, and I think of stuff like the bubonic plague and things like that in the Middle Ages. Of course, now we have things to fix that. Now we have things to fix COVID. Now we have things to fix everything else. But when a certain plague hits, you usually don't know what it's from, what it does, until somebody can figure it out. So in this case, we have all these plagues. They start, but they don't slow down. So if we had some major plague once a century, and then now we have one every 50 years and every 20, it's kind of like what it sounds like. Although if this is the last days, it's going to hit hard. So we might actually be talking about the vials of wrath, the 7, which would be inside the 7-year period. When a woman is with child in the 9 months, brings forth her son, with 2 or 3 hours of her birth, great pains compass her womb, which pains, when the children come forth, they do not slow down for a moment. So talking about childbirth. So again, the symbolism is the same. You have contractions and they're far apart, and then they begin to get closer and closer, and then you know the big stuff is coming. And that's a common idiom or teaching from a lot of these things. Even so, the plagues will not slow down after they begin to come upon the earth, and the world will mourn, and the sorrows will come upon it on every side. O my people, hear my word. Make yourself ready to do battle, but in those evils, be even as pilgrims upon the earth. He who sells, let him be as he who flees away, and he who buys as one who will let loose. He who occupies merchandise, and he who has no profit by it. He who builds, as he who will not dwell therein. He who sows, as if he did not reap, and also he who plants a vineyard will be like one who does not gather grapes. So this is the same thing. The Lord said this many times through the minor prophets and the others, that you plant all these things and create all these things that are only going to be left for someone else, because you're going to be in exile. In this case, it's because the vast majority are gone. They who marry, as they who will get no children, and they who marry not are as widowers. That's interesting too, because this looks like we're just talking about one thing after the other in the exact same situation. But this thing about even those that marry as if they have no children or get no children, it makes you wonder if some of the plagues control or destroy the ability to give birth or to father or something like that, which is kind of mentioned in other scrolls. This may or may not be talking about it, because it does seem to be pretty consistent. Therefore, they who labor in vain, for strangers will reap their fruits, and spoil their goods, and overthrow their houses, and take their children captives, for in captivity and famine will they get children. They who occupy for their merchandise with robbery, and more they deck their cities and their houses and their possessions and their own possessions, the more I will be angry with them for their sin, says the Lord. And this actually could go together here. Take their children captives. So the reason they don't have children could not be because they can't have them, but because they keep being stolen by other people who cannot. So all that kind of stuff happens in these weird situations. And to think that they could simply avoid it by turning to the Lord. Like you and I who are believers will not be here for this. Basically, and I should say this too, with this whole situation, a lot of people will argue, well, there is no rapture, it's just going to get worse, and everybody else is experiencing this now. Well, in different countries that are having a war, they run out of food and stuff, again, because of the war. Those are just in certain places. And a lot of times they get some sort of aid from some other country. Not always, but sometimes. So the vast majority of the people aren't having these problems. And these prophecies, the vast majority of people are having the problems. Like a harlot envies a right, honest, and virtuous woman, so will the righteous hate iniquity. And when she decks herself and will accuse her face to face, when he comes, who will defend him, who diligently searches out every sin upon the earth, that would be the Lord. Therefore, do not be like them, nor do their works. It's interesting to me because every place I go to and you listen to things, the evil person makes fun of the righteous person and maybe even persecutes. According to this, it's because they actually envy someone who is virtuous and right, which kind of makes sense. You've sinned and you realize the ramifications of sin, so you really wish you weren't there. And somehow you think it's not fair that the other person escaped these things because you made a mistake, that kind of thing. Again, if we go back and study scripture, we won't make these mistakes. Let's see here. What page are we on? 110. Okay, I think we stop there for tonight and then finish. Yeah, we'll finish this next week. So this didn't give us a whole lot of new information, but we do have some of the interesting things about it. In these situations, the main players are Babylon and Turkey, which is the east and the west as far as the Middle East is concerned, and then Egypt and Syria, which is the south and the north, from Israel, from that area. And the fact that they will get all these plagues also. But apparently these four are in a serious contention in some way during the last days. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all back together as an empire, although it could be, especially if you're going to Turkey, Babylon. If Babylon could be Iraq, it could be Rome, could be a revived Roman Empire of some part, and we don't know where that would be located. So the interesting thing about it is when you talk about Babylon, you have in Peter talks about he's greeting them from Rome, and so he greets them from Babylon. So in his mind, Babylon was the empire. At that point, it happened to be Rome, Italy. It was the headquarters for the old Roman Empire. But then we've had the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, then the Ottoman Empire, and then the Russian Empire. All these things are pieces of it. But if it's the empire, it's just wherever the empire will pop up. And then Asia Minor is Turkey, and that was definitely the Turkey was the with Constantinople was the headquarters of the Byzantine Empire, and then also was the headquarters of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, Egypt and Syria, much smaller, but they were the pieces of the Greek Empire when they were doing things with Israel. So interesting to look at all those prophecies together. So, okay, we'll stop there and we'll finish it up. We'll actually finish the book next week and then go into some other manuscripts. So sometimes we look at these and we get really interesting pieces of information, and other times we don't. We just get a generalized picture of everything. But we want to look at them because sometimes we actually get a piece of information. Like that one seemed to indicate that there was a fertility problem. They could not give birth. And that could just be from lack of famine, but the wording was like that. And when you would probably instantly dismiss that, except for the other prophecies about the situation at the end of time, like in the prophecies out of the Haggai, the herbal medicine stuff, in the scrolls, Dead Sea Scrolls, that is. So anyway, we'll come back and finish that. Let's see here. Let's go to the chat room and see if we have any questions. Okay, yeah, if you like this content, click on the thumbs up and subscribe. We go through some really interesting text, and sometimes we actually study scripture too, which we will get into here in the near future. There's some exciting manuscripts coming out in the next couple of weeks that we want to start studying. It's going to be really interesting. Also, I want to remind you that Calvary Chapel Emporia in Emporia, Kansas, is having a prophecy conference. Let me check the dates on it. Would be the 12th, 13th, and 14th of June. So I'll be one of the speakers there. We'll be talking about some new Hebrew manuscripts or scrolls of the New Testament that are very, very ancient, and some of the really interesting insights that they have in them. So we will be beginning to start teaching on that and go through that this year. So that's coming up here pretty quick, both the conference and the other studies. So just to let you know about that. Also, we do have, and I'm not sure about the dates, but we do have a Prophecy Watchers conference coming up in October. I think it's like the 9th, 10th, and 11th or something like that. Actually, I could find it out real quick. October. Yeah, it would be the 9th, 10th, and 11th of October, and that would be down in the Oklahoma City area. And that usually has a good 30-some speakers to it. Okay, question is about Babylon. In Revelation 14:8, we read that Babylon, that great city, is fallen. But in Isaiah 13:20, Babylon shall never be inhabited from generation to generation. So is Babylon built somewhere else? That's the big question a lot of us are wondering. It's either that Isaiah was prophesying of the last Babylon, or talking about his Babylon, and the same thing will happen to ours, which means they would be different places. If Babylon, instead of being a city per se, is an empire, even the same empire, which is the Roman Empire, that was the last one, it will morph between the old Roman Empire headquartered in Rome, which Peter said was Babylon, into the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire turns into the Ottoman Empire, and they're both somewhat destroyed in 1917, and then completely, at least as far as we can see at the moment, completely gone in 1945 with World War I and World War II. The connection, we haven't studied it exactly, but the connection between it and the Russian Empire is really interesting to look at. So you've got all those things there. And then, of course, somewhere along the line, we have the 10 nations coming up out of what used to be the Roman Empire. Excuse me. So there is a lot of things like that. Since Peter is saying that I'm writing to you from Babylon, and he's actually writing from Rome, and that's pretty well documented, he's using Babylon to refer to the empire. And a lot of people say, well, it has to still be Rome, Italy. Not necessarily. It's whatever the empire is. So if you go back in Daniel and look at this, the first empire was Nimrod with Babel, or Babylon. So that's the old name, and it actually was Babylon at that point. And then it fell, and then eventually the Egyptians took over, and that's where the children of Israel actually became a nation, and then had to come out of captivity or slavery, and the empire was destroyed. So the empire, the Nimrod's empire, was completely obliterated. Fascinating stories of exactly what happened and when. We see that in Josephus and Jasher and other places, just barely mentioned in Scripture, but the details are really important for us to study. And then we see when they came out of Egypt, Egypt was obliterated. Same kind of a basic idea, or the same situation. And then they went to Babylon. They came out of Babylon because Babylon was taken over by the Persians, again, obliterated. Persians were taken over by the Greeks, and then they were tossed back and forth between Egypt and Syria until the Romans came and obliterated the Greek Empire. And the Roman Empire stuck around. And so again, the Roman Empire looks like it has completely fallen as of 1945, 3 years before Israel became a nation. But as we see with all the turmoil over there, it's not quite over. And we know that there may be other things in the middle, but it ends with 10 nations from the old Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire is actually still going in a sense. So Babylon at that point, I would assume, would be that. But in Revelation, it talks about the fact that Babylon is an empire. So that's a force, as we think of, with an army. But it's also a commerce system. Now, we could be talking about the exact same Babylon at that time, or just talking about how they do things or whatever. So there's a religious Babylon, a commercial Babylon, and then an empire Babylon. There's 3 separate pieces to it. And they may be headquartered in different places, so we have to kind of pull them together. So studying Daniel, the Dead Sea Scrolls, specifically Noah's Testament, the commentaries on all the prophets, the extra prophecies in the scrolls, the book of Revelation, and then the book of Gad the seer, and some of the other things, we get a much clearer picture of what one of those things are, but we're still a little confused. So at this point, we should be able to figure these things out pretty quick, especially if, like most of us think, in the next decade or so, pretty quick would be several of these wars, and maybe the rapture happening in the next few years. If that's really the case, the timing, then these things have to come to pass pretty quick. And they have to build up. You can't just instantly have an empire. It has to form. So we have to look very careful and see what Russia is doing with Ukraine, what Iran wants to do through Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Gaza and stuff like that, what Israel might do to create an empire. just anything along those lines, what Europe might be doing to become an empire. And everybody's trying their best, but it's being stalemated by everything else. But we just have to watch very carefully. And any group of nations that are 10 in number that begin to form something, we need to watch very carefully of. We've had several. We had the European Common Market start off with 10. We had the G10 form. That may or may not have anything to do with it, but anything that's a 10, we want to watch for and then see where it goes from there. But if we get these things figured out, I think we'll have not just what was, thousands of years ago and what's coming in the next 50 years, but we'll be able to see the pieces all the way through, which is what we're trying to do on this channel, pull all those extra biblical scrolls together. Okay, let's see here. Do you think Jesus is making a reference to this book about the beginning of sorrows in Matthew 24:8? He could be. A lot of people, there's, if you go back and look at the beginning of this playlist, there was a couple of quotes that are in Matthew and Luke. And the quotes are Jesus quoting the exact same piece of information, quite a bit actually, to the point that everybody agrees either this is fake, made up in the Middle Ages, and is quoting Jesus, or Jesus is quoting this document. And for the longest time, and still a lot of the people that don't believe in prophecy would say, well, it's just simply a medieval forgery and it's quoting the New Testament. Except the same quote is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which predate at the very least 100 BC. So if the quote, be it from this or from something else, we don't know for sure who's quoting who, but the quote and the information was around at 100 BC, then Jesus is quoting either this manuscript or Jesus and this manuscript is quoting something else. But either way, it's not it quoting him, as people used to think. So really interesting pieces to find out. It's the normal way of things. The normal way that things happen, basically, today is disbelief in academia. Even in the big seminaries, they really don't believe in prophecy. They'll consistently say, well, this was made up. It was quoted by someone else. You've probably heard or read in some of the liberal Bibles the commentary about how the book of Daniel, chapter 11, is too accurate. So obviously what happened is somebody in the 1st century BC, 2nd century BC, wrote all this stuff down pretending to be Daniel, to say a type of prophecy to get people to believe in it, to rise up and attack, to rally the troops. And the thing is, if anybody who did that would be a false prophet. And a false prophet, rather, will not give real prophecy. And if you look very carefully at it, it doesn't end with Daniel in 165 BC. It goes all the way up to the Romans coming, and then the Romans destroying the temple. That was 70 AD. So somebody making a false prophecy, not knowing anything about anything, writing this is what will happen, he would have had to have written it after 70 AD. And there are so many manuscripts of Daniel that date way before 70 AD. Not just the Dead Sea Scrolls, but several others. So it's obviously real prophecy, and it's the same with this. People would say, well, it's fake. It's just quoting it. But the three-headed eagle prophecy being fulfilled in 476, the displacement prophecy, which if you plug in the other manuscript, apparently occurred in the 108th Jubilee, exactly when it did happen. Those are not coincidences, and those are not rewritten after the facts. Yeah, when you have dates like that, they're a little too specific. So those are the things we want to make sure we don't read anything that is garbage. There's a lot of garbage out there. We also want to be careful because some of the pieces of these things could have been mistranslated, added, garbled on purpose or accidentally. So we've got to be careful with it. But the Book of Enoch, Book of Jubilees for history, Book of Enoch for prophecy, actually. Forget about the Nephilim, but the back of the book, all the prophecies. My son and I were talking earlier today about the 12 gaps in the animal prophecy, what those would be, because at that point it kind of disappears. The maps are all mapped, the 12 gaps, rather, are all mapped out in the book, our Book of Enoch anyway, with dates of exactly when they took place. And it's interesting to me that there's only 12, exactly as prophesied. And that gets us up to 1948. So, and then there's the other prophecies about the shepherds and how many of them there are. We'll just have to wait to see if by the time it's over, that's how many there are. And if you believe in the prophecy, you can take a look at it and try to figure out approximately how far we are along and how many other years it might be. So it's really, really interesting to look at that. So yeah, it's definitely not this quoting Jesus, that's for sure. So Jesus is either quoting this or this, and Jesus is quoting some other manuscript. And I don't know of any other manuscripts. I'm just saying that would be the only possibilities. Question, in the book of Ezra, was the original true priesthood Levi polluted and the duties taken over by the Nethinim, the descendants of Cain? And did they create the Catholic Church, Islam? Yeah, I've heard things like that, but let me just kind of pick this together. The true priesthood was of the Zadok line. Originally, it was supposed to be only through Aaron, Moses' brother. 3 generations down, you've got Aaron, Kohath, Amram, or Levi rather. It starts with Levi, Kohath, Amram, and then Aaron. So it was a Levitical priesthood, then it was Aaronic, and then down when you get down to the days of Solomon, there was a rebellion. So the same thing happened. From that time forward, the priests can only be through the descendants of Zadok. So Zadok is a direct descendant of Aaron, who's a direct descendant of Levi. So it's the same thing. But as the people grow and it branches out, sometimes they'll just pick one line. Then it'll branch out again, you'll pick one line. You have the same thing with the king lines. The Messiah had to come through Judah. Well, once you got a big tribe, that doesn't tell you anything. Well, now it has to come through King David. Okay, so it's a Davidic line, and then you go down so far and you get down to the 2 sons and that kind of stuff. So it's pretty interesting in that way. I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, let me put this one back. There we go. That's where we were. So the true priesthood is through Levi, Aaron, and then Zadok. There was a cult takeover in the 1st or 2nd century BC, or actually 2nd or 3rd, where you've got fake Zadok priests, and that's where we get the name Sadducees from. They take over the priesthood, they completely destroy it. They hunt down and try to assassinate the Zadok priests, and they have to pick up and go down to Egypt for safety. And so that's written about in the Damascus Covenant. It's interesting history. There's nothing about the descendants of Cain in there. And the Catholic Church is a Christian thing. It's not connected with them at all. There are legends about the Catholics creating Islam and things like that, which I don't know that we could prove or disprove. We do have a book on I think it's the ancient or the Gnostic origins of Roman Catholicism. And it just goes through what the early church fathers said about it. About the first 6 or so Roman bishops were really good and godly. The next 6 were, I thought it was interesting, it was 6 or 7. But the next 6 or so were pretty much orthodox, but very arrogant. We run the kingdom, we're Rome, that kind of thing. And then after that, they got thoroughly polluted. And this is all the information from Hippolytus from about 200 AD, all the stuff that's going on. So that gives you a general idea about this. A lot of people try to mix all these things together and create some really wild conspiracy theories. And some of them may be correct, but we want to focus just on the things that we can nail down. So in other words, the Catholic doctrine is not correct, according to the early church fathers. So there's problems there. It might be very, very deep and it might be shallow, but problems nonetheless. So we need to continue to look at that. And Islam, of course, was prophesied in these places, the dragon nations, and those kind of things. So that's about all I can say about that per se. Let's see here. So next question, I've been wondering or pondering the angel from Daniel 8. Is he saying that the abomination of desolation is exactly 2,300 days, 6 years, 6.3 years after the daily sacrifices in the third temple are started? Not sure. A lot of people, if you'll notice, it says the evening and the mornings rather than the days. So a lot of people cut that in half. If we're talking about sacrifices from the start to when he cuts them off is 2,300 days or 2,300 evenings and mornings, then it would be exactly half of that as far as days. In other words, 2 per day. So that would be a little over 3 years. So that makes it sound like the sacrifices might start maybe 6 months into the 7-year tribulation period and end exactly in the middle. So there is that 30-day window where things happen in the middle. So it'll be interesting to kind of see. Well, hopefully you and I both will see or watch it if we do from heaven. Yeah, that's an interesting one. A lot of people don't talk about the 2,300 days. So I'm not sure exactly how that goes in there. I do have some theories in the book, Ancient Church Fathers, when it gets to the prophecy section. There's some charts where we try to put those together. There's the 1,260 days, 1,290 days, 1,335, and then the 2,300. And it could also be between that time and when the millennial temple begins operations. So it could be, many, many days into the millennial reign. Question, is this talking about the warning the Jewish people or the nations surrounding the tribulation? Well, a little bit of both probably, but I'm thinking this is actually talking about the time period of the tribulation period or right before, because it seems like, but it does tend to go back and forth, much like when we're reading Isaiah. Isaiah will say, like, talking about he's come to comfort the brokenhearted, preach the gospel to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind. And then in the same sentence, right in the middle of the sentence, it says, and proclaim the terrible day of the Lord. And there's 2,000 years in between those. So it seems like a lot of times, not even so much hopping back and forth, but the prophets will talk about things in general. So the coming of the Lord or the comings happen like this. Well, there's a lot of detail and they're separated by 2,000 years apart. But yeah, I think this is on our time period, the time of sorrows, so coming up. But we can learn a lot if you go back and you look at the tribulation period, the time of sorrows that they had in the first century up to the destruction of the temple. Look and see how bad it got and specifically why. It was because the Sadducees, a cult, had taken over the government and polluted the religion, and it became totally apostate. You go back to the end of the first age, you've got Nimrod claiming to be a type of Antichrist or a type of Christ, and you've got a false prophet and a system, and you've got a lot of details on what their system was about, how they did it. And then you've got Paul talking about the end of our age, a 7-year tribulation period with an Antichrist. So if you go back and you look at all those and kind of pull them together, you get to see patterns along those lines. And that's one reason why we put up the dsscalendar.org website. So we can go back and look at the UNAs and everything and try to calculate things. You'll see some really interesting points that way. Okay, I don't remember hitting that button. Okay, so do you have any information on calculations used by Newton for his 2060 date? your overall thoughts on his conclusions. Yeah, there was a long time ago, there was a copy of a handwritten copy. Of course, I was in Latin, so it didn't do me any good, but of the calculations of the 2060 and of the star patterns and the earthquakes and how he did all of those kind of calculations. And it might still be there, but it was in the Linda Hall Library in Kansas City, Missouri. And so I went there kind of naive. Can I check this out? It's like, there's nothing in that library you can check out. But I got to take a look at it. It was under glass, just one page. But it would be interesting if somebody would do, and maybe they have by now, I haven't checked it, but do an online or a print or a reprint of it so people can study it. But yeah, it's his calculations. I forget exactly how it was done, but I don't remember how he did it exactly. I actually have a book on that, and I'll get it and see if I can show it to you next week, written by a friend of mine who lives down south. Did a really good job of putting together the 2060s and all that. But to me, it's interesting that he would calculate back then that the second coming would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2060, and so it's interesting to see that, to look and see how he did it. So many times we really want the Lord to come back now that we don't actually sit down and look. I think of when I was a teenager and my parents, we were saying it can't get any worse than this. Well, yeah, it could and did. And this isn't nearly as bad as it could be. And will be. But we always think of that. It's like, well, it's got to be quick. Well, no, from that time period, when I graduated high school, it was 1984. And so I've been out of school now 40 some years, and a lot of prophecies have been fulfilled, but not the rapture one yet, and not the second coming. And so far, no 10 kingdoms or Antichrist. But we know it's coming because everything else is setting up for it. So really interesting. But yeah, conclusions. Again, he's using, I don't know what calendar he was using other than just Gregorian, but I think he was on to something, and I think he's got a general idea that way. But see, that doesn't mean that he can't be off, give or take 10 years or even 20 years. But it's interesting that he did that. He was one that would say, I just want to know the date. I would like it to be right now, but I just honestly want to know the date. And if it's 50 years, or in his case, a couple of 100 years off, I'm not going to make it, but at least, it will happen. So good question, though. Fascinating. And he also did a commentary on the book of Revelation, which is really interesting to look at. And just like we speculate on if the rapture's around the corner, who would Babylon be? Well, it can only be one or two things if it's happening right now. If it's 100 years from now, who knows? And he was doing the same thing. He'd speculated it's probably this and this war. And of course, he was totally wrong at his speculations because he's at least 200 years off. If it was happening in his day, I would probably say, yeah, good guess. That's about the only thing it could be. But it's interesting to see. Okay, so Cheryl, super chat, $20. Thank you very much for the donation. And we really appreciate, let me switch this over here. Really appreciate you guys giving donations to the ministry. And then we also have, just to remind you of the things that we're doing, you can see the donut button or donate button up there. Donuts, I must be hungry. But we also have, reminds me of all these things, we have our manuscript channel. And if you're watching this on our main channel, if you just go down to the bottom, you'll see Bible Facts manuscript channel. And what we're doing on that channel is no teaching, just the text being read for you. So we're in the process of finishing up Enoch right now, and then we will put Jasher up there, and we're going to start putting some of these other ancient Hebrew manuscripts that you will definitely be interested in. So anyway, that's our second channel. We also have a network where we discuss herbalism, prophecy, Dead Sea Scrolls. It's kind of like a Facebook. It's done by Mighty Networks. And that's free to subscribe to. The other channel, of course, is free also. But anyway, And then to remind you of other stuff, we have a subscription to Give, Send, Go. So that's it's a good Christian group, and we get more from that from PayPal. But we also have PayPal also if you want to support us in that way. So just kind of those things to go through. But yeah, thank you for the chat, the super chat rather, $20. Every little bit helps. And the more, it's fantastic. Now we have a small team working on some of these manuscripts. It would take me literally a couple of years to get this stuff done. And I'm thinking a lot of it will be done probably by the end of this year. And we have some really interesting things coming out in the next couple of weeks. Please explain how the current wars in Israel relate to the prophecies in Psalm 83 or might lead to Ezekiel 38 or other prophecies. Well, the current wars that are going on is basically Gaza being taken over. And there are several prophecies about the Gaza Strip. Basically, the prophecies, and these are all from the Old Testament, not extra biblical, just from the Old Testament. The prophecies are that there would be a government structure in Gath of the Philistines during, and it gives us the Una of which when it would take place, which is anytime between 1975 and 2075. Is somewhere in there, that 100-year period, there was supposed to be a government that calls itself violence, which in Hebrew is Hamas. So this thing was supposed to be created, but it was a terrorist-type government organization, would exist for a number of years, and then would be decimated on a certain year. Now, the year that it's supposed to be decimated is actually given in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And of course, this whole thing is in process now. But long story short, when you look at Obadiah and Zephaniah, they control the coastline all the way up to Zarephath, which is a city where Elijah raised the widow woman's son. And that city is Seraphon, Lebanon. And it's right north. It's the first city north. It's only like 5 or 6 miles north of the Litani River. And right now, and it has been for quite a number of years, the Litani River is supposed to be the dividing line, no armaments below that, because you're on top of a hill. It's easy to rain down rockets on Israel. So that's the way it's supposed to be. But Hezbollah keeps rearming from somewhere and continues to attack off and on every so often. And so now the prophecies are eventually they will take control of southern Lebanon. I don't know if it's still called Lebanon or not, but they'll occupy it up to Seraphon or Old Zarephath. And it actually talks about, and of course, that's the Litani River. So that is actually in process also. And some of the other prophecies are they also take Gilead, which is kind of a tip of Jordan, northwestern tip. And of course, they control Bashan, which is the Golan Heights. There will be many battles fought in Bashan, 7 or 8 specifically, at different wars where they actually take more Golan Heights territory. So that was one of the first prophecies fulfilled, and it's been declared Israeli sovereign territory, I think, since 1982, under Menachem Begin. So that's going on, and there's several other prophecies. So how that fits in, number one, with Psalm 83, it may or may not. Psalm 83 is a prophecy about 10 terrorist groups, not necessarily nations, but terrorist groups. So for instance, it doesn't say that Egypt's attacking from the south, but Hagarenes are attacking from the area of Egypt. And it's not Lebanon per se, but a terrorist group in Lebanon attacking from Gabal. And then just all these other places. So there's these 10 terrorist groups in those countries that surround Israel, not necessarily the countries, or at least not officially. And the prayer is by Asaph. He's saying, Lord, will you make them disappear like you did the Canaanites? So this will finally stop, permanently stop. And it will permanently stop in the millennial reign. But some of the prophecies connected with it are really interesting. And so some of the church fathers talk about that particular war occurring in the Middle Ages, in the middle of the tribulation period. And that may or may not be. I know Bill Salas thinks it's much earlier than that. And I was talking to him about that, and I said, but the cool thing about it is you and that old church father are both saying it's not fulfilled and it wasn't way back when. It's either at the very end or towards the very end. And so he kind of liked that idea. But so that's Psalm 83. So what's going on now definitely could relate to it. We don't know when it's going to happen, just that it's going to happen. Much like the prophecy in Isaiah 17 about the destruction of Damascus. It's still there, and the prophecy is pretty specific. It's because of what the children of Israel do. So that doesn't mean that they deliberately destroy, or it would have said that. But it's that kind of a wording really basically means they did something, and the end result, unexpectedly, was the destruction of Damascus in one day. So that to me means they have to go blow up the depots, so that they've been doing this for a long time to make sure there's no weapons fall into hands that come down and nuke some city or something. But somewhere along the line, there's going to be a chemical or tactical nuclear weapon or something that's active that's going to be hit and probably wipe out the city. We've seen that almost happen in Beirut, Lebanon, not too long ago, just a few years back, where it wiped out. They were just blowing up things like they normally do, but this particular one, whatever it was, blew up 17 city blocks. That's not a whole city, but that's a good chunk. And then recently, the fires and things that have been going on in the port city over in, I think it's Iran, I think. So anyway, those things happen. Those aren't a big deal because there's no nuclear or chemical weapons yet anyway. But something like that probably happens. So we got Isaiah 17, you got Psalm 83, you got Jeremiah 49, the prophecy about what happens with Iran. And then also, I think it's Enoch 51 or 56, one of those, talking about giving you more details about the problem or the war that happens between Israel and Iran. So lots of interesting things. Ezekiel 38 is all about the Gog-Magog war, and everybody kind of muddies the water, but the land of Magog is southern Russia, and there's so many documents to talk about that. And the book of Jasher, for instance, will mention after the languages happened at the Tower of Babel, they'll mention who's doing who or what the kings were. And it actually mentions the first 2 or 3 Scythian kings from the land of Magog. So you know you're talking about the Scythians or that southern Russia. And so the interesting thing about it is if southern Russia, or if Russia in general, is what's left of the Roman Empire, which the three-headed eagle prophecy and a few others indicate that might be, that would explain why the empire technically still exists and will only be destroyed when they come down to attack Israel. And then they're wiped out supernaturally. That creates a vacuum of power, and other small states that used to be in the Roman Empire, any one of the Roman empires, will come together to try to form a new one, but they won't agree. And that's when the Antichrist, ruling from a country north of Israel, steps in to complete the deal. And then they go attack Babylon, and Turkey gets involved and things like that, like we've been talking about. So it's a really interesting series of events. And it could be in play now, or it might still be a decade off or something like that. But everything is still in the works. So Turkey is still wanting to revive their empire. Russia is not backing down in any time soon. Too busy in the Ukrainian war to come and attack Israel right now. But that doesn't mean anything, you know. So lots of stuff going on with that. And there's several other prophecies too. But hopefully that'll give you kind of an overview. And a lot of these things are in our prophecy prophecy playlist, if you want to go back and look at those. But again, thank you for the donation and the questions. Revelation 16 Says the great city Babylon was split into 3 sections. What is happening here? Is it literal? It could be literal, and we have to figure out what we mean by Babylon. Again, that goes back to the previous question on Peter said it was Rome, and so a lot of people still think it's Roman Catholicism, at least the religious system part of it. Gad the seer, that particular prophecy book, which is the one mentioned in 1 Chronicles 29, it seems to indicate that religions will form, one out of Saudi Arabia and one out of Rome, Italy. And they're anti-Semitic religions, but they're not the real problem at the end. At the end, there is a faction of each that come together to form a new false religious system. And that's what we call the Babylonian mystery religion. And then the Antichrist uses that to come to power and then destroys it and forms yet another, his religious system, which only lasts for like less than 3 years. So a lot of that stuff going on. So we'd have to figure out exactly what Babylon we're talking about, what part of the empire, and that seems to be still a little too confusing. But the city of Babylon, your first thought would be Babylon, Iraq. Of course, Baghdad is the capital. But whatever Babylon is, if you're talking about the religious aspect and it is Rome, then the city of Rome is probably split into 3 pieces. If you're talking about Israel being, one of the other theories is that Israel is corrupt because they're not moral necessarily. They're just like us. In other words, they're not the way they should be biblically. So that Jerusalem might be split into 3. So there's lots of other ideas too. So that one we don't really know for sure. But thank you for that. It's a good question. I wish I knew the answer to it. Probably would help with a lot of other things. Could Daniel be speaking of both eastern and western legs of the Colossus, the revived Roman Empire, as a reference to the papacy and the Byzantine religious sects? The Christianity is a harlot in Revelation. Very well could be. The interesting thing about that is when you look at that, and even if you talk about the Holy Roman Empire, because Rome itself doesn't really have an army, but whether you're talking about Rome and Constantinople or the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, it's still the same. One's Roman Catholic, or the two, Rome and Germany, basically the Holy Roman Empire, and then the other is Greek, Greek speaking and everything, but Byzantine Empire, both Christian in name at least, one Latin, one Greek. So you have 2 actual empires, the Roman Catholic and the Greek Orthodox. And then you also have the differences in the religion. So Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox. And of course, the Greek Orthodox falls to Islam when it becomes the Ottoman Empire. And so then you have those 2. And those are obviously the 2 legs, and I understand that. Somewhere along the line, there's 3 heads to the eagle. So there's a missing piece that we're not quite getting. But as far as that prophecy goes, I think that's pretty straightforward. Interesting thing about that, though, no matter how you look at that, there's 2 legs, which seems to be Holy Roman and Byzantium. So the question would remain, if there's 5 toes on each foot, are there 5 Roman Catholic European nations that come together with 5 either Islamic and or Greek Orthodox or whatever, but in the Middle East under the Byzantine arm? So interesting kind of a thing. So we'll see. Whatever happens, I would think it would be forming now. I mean, we all think that. It's always we think it's happening in our time, but looking at the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, I think it really is happening or beginning to happen in our time. And a lot of times we won't notice any of this until, boom, it's there. You know, somebody's been working for decades to establish a new empire and it never works. And finally, one day they make it work and the empire's here. So, yeah, so that could very easily be. So it seems like when it's talking about a religious Babylon, a Babylonian empire, and then a commercial system, They could all be three aspects of the same thing, and in a sense it is. But commercial Babylon might be headquartered, like, I don't know, Israel, New York, somewhere, wherever the best trading thing is, And then the power behind it could be whatever country has the biggest army. And then so there's these different aspects. So anyway, we'll see what happens. That's a good question. Those are kind of things I'd really love to know. Do you think that the east and the west legs of Daniel's image refer to rather the papacy? Did I just click on that again? Might be the same one. Okay. And a revived Rome that coincides with the harlot riding the beast in Revelation and Zechariah. It seems to be. Like I said, it's either the religions that we're looking for or the empires. And in the case of Holy Roman and Byzantium, it's the same thing. It's two slightly different religions, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, and different languages, Latin and Greek, and different empires, but very friendly to each other, at least from time to time. So yeah, it's got to be connected with that. So the two legs of Daniel's image have to be those two pieces of the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman and the Byzantine Empire. Question, I've never heard anything of Josephus. What do you recommend that would be never read anything, most beneficial? Josephus is a really big book, but he's a Jewish historian. I don't read the last probably 2/3 of it because he's up to the Roman time at that point, and he's just so detailed with which Roman troops went where and which one of the generals did this. Just lots and lots of details. But specifically the stuff about the destruction of the temple and the Christians and the Jews and the things that were going on at that time. I also like his extra information just in the first book. Josephus is made up of 10 books, and Eusebius is the same. There are 10 books in Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews. The first book and a little bit of the second is really the ancient history. So you'll get a lot of information about Nimrod and that empire and the things that happened, a lot more detail than you do from scripture. And then the book of Jasher also does that time period too. But then Josephus and Eusebius both focusing on the events that happened a few years before, leading up to the destruction of the temple. All that stuff with the prophecies that were fulfilled and that kind of thing. Amazing clues in that thing. So those would be the main pieces I would recommend. Where do I find a learning book on Paleo Hebrew? That's a good question. Hebrew is just Hebrew. So, well, I guess it's not really. Modern Hebrew, you can get any book and study and learn modern Hebrew. The bulk of the language, like maybe 80-90% of it's going to be identical. The sentence structure, the letters, the words, and everything. And then, because what happened is they stopped using it as a normal language about 2,000 years ago, and it was revived as a normal language for a country in 1948. That's when it was official. So anyway, but the language changes quite a bit over the centuries. So when we're looking at the Old Testament, you're talking about the language from like 1000 BC to 600 AD, or 600 BC rather. It's like about 400 or 500 year time period, and then before that, you're talking about the things that were back 1800 BC. And so even when you get to looking at New Testament scrolls and other things related to them that are in Hebrew from the 1st or 2nd century, that language is a little bit different again. So the Paleo Hebrew, if you just memorize the alphabet, so the current alphabet that they've used for about 2,000 years is the block script. The dots underneath it that are the vowel points came along about 800 AD. So you got the first 800 years or so of Hebrew without vowel points. And then for the last 1200 or so, you've got the vowel points. But then before that, you have Paleo Hebrew That's the kind that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you remember like when we were kids and we wanted our own secret code and we would just make up an alphabet. And, once you start cracking the code, you realize this is English. It's just normal English. So it's really easy. You just flip or it's a different font, so to speak. Maybe it's so different that it's hard to read at first. So that's the same thing with like Hebrew and Paleo-Hebrew, and then even Proto-Hebrew, which is quite a bit different again. But again, if you know the Paleo-Hebrew script, it's just Hebrew from about that same time period. So that's Paleo-Hebrew is like 1500 to 2000 BC. So you're talking about in the time period of Joshua, Moses, those things. So when we read Genesis to the book of Ruth or so, that kind of Hebrew is going to be Proto-Hebrew, but it's been rewritten in block script. So Hebrew is basically Hebrew, and I'm just saying just learn the alphabet. So there's several sites I think you can go to just to get the alphabet, and to look at them. So hopefully that'll help a little bit. I implore you to do that. It's a lot of people get off on too much gematria and Hebrew roots theology and stuff because they don't go through and try to finish learning to read. And there's a lot of myths out there, and I don't need to tell you what they are. You just need to learn to read. I would encourage you to do that. You don't need to be able to read the entire everything that there is and have a perfect 5,000 word vocabulary or anything like that. Just know the basics. And on most of those Hebrew things that you would use to learn, like the flashcards, they'll give you the top 1,000 root words that are used in the Old Testament. So if you memorize the 1,000 root words, you can pretty much read. And then you take like 3 or 4 week course on grammar, and you're pretty much done. You can translate anything. And that's pretty much what we want to do. We want to be able to do word studies. And if it says something funny that actually might mean something different, we just want to know that. So, and to do that, there's a lot to it. I'm just saying it's not as hard as learning the language fluently, although that would probably be a good thing too. So I encourage you with that, and I hope you achieve that. Jubilees and Jasher disagree on the fall of Babel. I heard James Vanderkam has been able to fix stuff in Jubilees using fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Is this true? Is Jasher less reliable as not in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Yeah, I would definitely go with the Dead Sea Scrolls first. I would go with Jasher second and Jubilees third. And the major reason for this is I believe that Enoch and Jubilees are legitimate. They are the ones that we're supposed to have, but they went from Hebrew into Ge'ez and apparently have been edited over the centuries. And then in the 1700s, I believe, they were translated, 1800s, were translated from Ge'ez into English. And a lot of the problems you can see there. So mainly the main problems are some aspects of the stories, very few, but it's mainly the numbers. So in Jubilees, for instance, it continues. It's like it's counting 49 years or even less than that as a Jubilee, because it starts with Genesis 1:1, and it goes through the same stories. And it gets to be, if you're comparing it with the Masoretic Hebrew numbers, it'll get up to 300 years off. But then it miraculously starts fixing itself, and the lifespans are quite a bit different. And so it starts going back. So from Genesis to, I think it was the death of either Joseph or Jacob or somebody, it's perfect. It's like within 1 year. But in the middle of that, they're off 300 years. So obviously somebody got the numbers off and somebody else tried to fix it. And so that happened when it was in Ge'ez. Now, when you look it up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are several fragments. We only have a handful of chapters that are actually from the Dead Sea Scrolls. But out of those handful, I think there's 2 or 3 that have one of the numbers, like Abraham was 75 when this happened, and Jubilee says he was 90 or something. Well, the Dead Sea Scroll version of Jubilees agrees perfectly with the Masoretic numbers. So you can tell then that the original Jubilees that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls has the same dates. It's absolutely perfect. And the one from Giaz, somehow the numbers got off. But you'll see that in Josephus, you'll see that in just about everywhere. Somehow it's hard to get numbers. I don't know why it would be, but it's just weird that way. Jasher, on the other hand, has all the numbers together. There's 3 separate timelines running through it, so they check each other. And it works perfectly with like Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews, the other things. So I would always go by the Dead Sea Scroll version of the Old Testament, which is almost identical to what we have in the Hebrew. Numbers are fine. Sometimes there's little phrases that have obviously been changed by rabbis somewhere along the line, because the Dead Sea Scroll always agrees with Paul. So if you ever find a quote on a prophecy where Paul quotes Isaiah, like the prophecy about a body you have prepared for me, the Masoretic text says something different. Dead Sea Scroll version agrees perfectly with Paul. So those are the things to look for. No one Bible is perfect. So if you're using an NIV, an NASV, a King James, whatever, there's probably an error in there somewhere once in a while. But we want to compare things back to the oldest manuscripts we can. And that would be the Dead Sea Scroll Hebrew version of the Old Testament, and then the earliest Greek and or earliest Hebrew of the New Testament. And that sounds confusing to a lot of you, but yeah, those things do exist. So those are the things we would look at. So Jasher would be less reliable than the Dead Sea Scrolls. I can't think of an example, but I'm sure I would place it like that. The Dead Sea Scrolls would be the most reliable. And then anything that's been through 2 or 3 languages would be suspect. So Jubilees and Enoch from the Ethiopic canon. But currently, that's the only ones we have as far as the full book. So that's what we have to work with. Much like in the Middle Ages, when all they had to work with was the Latin, and they were trying to get all the Greek manuscripts that they could get, and they were being held by monasteries that wouldn't let people translate them into native languages. If I'm not mistaken, didn't Israel take control of Mount Hermon in recent months? Yes, they're actually going to permanently keep it, and they're in the process, I think, of building they have anyway, they're at least in the process of building a immense radar station. And it actually would let you see most of Syria all the way out to part of Cyprus. Yeah, Cyprus, I think it is. Anyway, and down in parts of Egypt and everything. It's a massive radar station. So, and you could do that setting up as high as Mount Hermon is. So yeah, it's really interesting. That is major. I totally agree. I've also heard that it's the same as the Mount of Transfiguration where Jesus broke the oath's curse. That's possible. There's 2 different Caesarea. There's Caesarea Philippi, and there's another one. So there's a big debate on where he actually did that, and that's one of the 2 possibilities. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at. I recently listened to First Clement on YouTube and was surprised that Clement believed the story of the Phoenix. Are you familiar with the Phoenix excerpt in Clement? Yeah, I am. And that's been through several renditions too. He's either talking, and just to let you guys know, the legend of the Phoenix is a bird that's like lives in lava and it's on flames. It's like that kind of a thing. And the legend is that it lives for 500 years, and then it dives into the flames and dies, and then reemerges. So in other words, the idea is it wouldn't lay eggs; it just revives itself. And I think what's going on here is he's taking the concept of the Roman eagle, like we've seen the 3-headed eagle in 2 or 3 manuscripts, and Daniel just says it's the nondescript beast. I believe that they were all eagles because it fits with Rome, and that's what it's supposed to be. In Daniel's prophecy about the ram and the goat being Persia and Greece, That was perfect because the national animal of Greece was a goat. The national animal of Persia was a ram. So when it says ram and goat, that's actually it. So eagle would actually be it. Um, so anyway, and I believe lions were Babylon also. But anyway, a lot of people have gotten confused on that or wondered, because it seems like when you read it, it does seem like he believes the legend is real. Like everybody knows this bird, we all saw it last year or whatever. And I don't think he meant to say it that way. I think what he's saying is that the phoenix to him is the same thing as the ziz in ancient Hebrew. So in ancient Hebrew, there's a land animal. Think of Revelation 12 and 13. There's the dragon in the air, and then there's Leviathan in the water, and it looks just like the dragon because it's got 7 heads and 10 horns. And then there's the false prophet, which is the land animal. The land animal is called Behemoth. The sea dragon, sea serpent, is called Leviathan. And then the air one is called Ziz. And this has just been from ancient times. It's just part of, if you go back and look it up in the Talmud, for instance, it'll talk about what is the time of Jacob's trouble. And these are all identified, and they have them right. So with all these cases, so in other words, he's taking the concept of the Ziz, which would be like the Roman Empire, satanically controlled, coming against Israel in the last days, through the Leviathan and the Behemoth, 2 different parts. And so I think what he's doing is connecting those two, and he's pulling it in together because it revives itself every 500 years. And what I think is interesting is we have on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar 500-year onas. And I think what he's trying to say, and I don't think he's garbled or anything or confused, I think the text has been slightly garbled over time. That would be my guess, because I doubt anyone like him would actually believe that the phoenix actually exists. But if the phoenix was used as a symbol for the 500-year onas and the revived Roman Empire, I could see why he would mention it and tell us to pay attention to the legend, much like the legend of Behemoth and Leviathan. And those were actually real creatures that God made, but they became symbols for the future events. So I think that that's just my opinion on it. So he's either confused or he's trying to make a point, and somehow it sounds like he believes that it's literal. So someone might listen to part of what I said about the 7-headed red dragon, and for me to believe, I believe it's literal, and I'm meaning the book of Revelation is literal, and it's end time, and it was a literal dream, and we got to figure out what the 7 heads on the dragon represent, and so he could be using that kind of language. But I hope that helps. Glad to see you studying Clement. He's got some really interesting things in it. Very little prophecy. That would be a kind of one if it's what I think it is. Some posters think America is Babylon. Yeah, that's another theory about it. I think they usually get that from the idea that New York, either America and or just New York, but New York is like a central trading area. And the idea, if New York was suddenly destroyed, for instance, a lot of the world's commerce would stop, because America buys tons of stuff, not just from China, but China, Mexico, I mean, probably all over, just different things. And so right now, America would kind of fit for being not the religious power, but the might of America could be an empire type thing, especially if it changes and goes that way. A lot of times we're isolationists. So the empire possibly, not the religion, but the commerce especially. But I'm an American, have never really left America, so I can't tell you the kind of commerce they have in China and in the Middle East and different places. There are third world countries, but there's also countries that have a lot of, well, like the Arab countries have a lot of oil. They may not produce a whole lot of things, but they will buy a lot of things with the oil. So commerce is either the ability to buy or the stuff to buy, or both, probably both. But so it's one of those things. I kind of think that about America. Anyway, there's been several books written saying that America is Babylon. I don't believe that myself. But what I thought was funny is that's why you got to pull all the prophecies together. I had one friend that was saying that America is Babylon, done, and that the Russians were going to nuke Babylon in the next few years and destroy us. And I'm thinking, like, it's not possible. If we're Babylon, we continue to be wealthy and untouched all the way up through the middle of the tribulation period, and we're destroyed by the Antichrist. And Turkey likes us so much that it wants to defend us. So that just, it does not, I mean, that part could change, I suppose, but the whole thing just does not make sense to me. So you can't have it both ways, in other words. So saying like we're Babylon and the current president is the Antichrist, same kind of a deal. He gathers 10 nations to attack and destroy the nation that he's president of so he could take over the nation. He's already taken over the nation. He's the president. So you got to think of stuff like that. And what we're studying here with the Ezra Apocalypse, learning that Babylon is a thing, and that Turkey really likes Babylon and wants to emulate it and goes to defend it, means number one, Turkey is not Babylon, but Turkey sure likes Babylon. And with Turkey wanting to redo the Ottoman Empire, that would make you think maybe Rome has something to do with it. And we're told we have a revived Roman Empire coming. So I don't completely connect all the dots yet, but there's a lot of things that we can pull together to kind of think of it. So some people do think that. I don't think so, because of several things like that. So, okay. That's all the questions. So we will go ahead and continue. We should finish up our study of the Ezra Apocalypse next week. And then the following week, I want to introduce you to some new to me Hebrew manuscripts that are very old. And I think you're going to absolutely love these things. It's going to be very, very amazing. So thank you for subscribing and becoming members and supporting us, buying the books and asking the questions. And I feel very blessed that we basically all are a team. You come up with questions I hadn't thought of, and I get to go research them, and we'll figure stuff out eventually. Anyway, God bless you guys, and we will see you next week.